Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Kazaman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to IssuesWatch Live. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping announcements. If you have a colleague who wasn't able to attend this session, we'll be rebroadcasting it on March 26th at 9 a.m. If you have any questions during the program, please enter them into the Q&A box on your screen. We'll try to answer questions submitted during the live broadcast throughout the program, though we may not be able to address all of them. Questions submitted during the replay will be answered via the Q&A module. And please, questions only, no opinions or political statements. Finally, throughout the broadcast, you will see attendance checks pop up on your screen. Be sure to click the green check mark each time in order to receive your CPE credit. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into several components of Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey's 2025 fiscal year. He released this proposed budget on February 27th. After several years of rosy budgets built on billions of dollars in federal COVID aid and record-breaking tax increases, it appears things are going back to normal in trend. Here are some highlights. The total budget is $56 billion, which is about 3% higher than the fiscal year 24 budget, and this equals about the inflation rate. There is a structural gap of $1.8 billion, and this gap is being filled by funds from the budget surplus. That surplus, the budget reserves are dropping from $8.7 billion to $6.1 billion, depending on who you're talking to, but those numbers are pretty much on target. There's a 2.5% hike in corporate taxes for corporations with net income over $10 million. About 40% of the entire budget, $23.6 billion, is going to school and municipal aid. Direct funding for schools is up $900 million to a total of $11.66 billion. There's also a $124 million hike for preschool education. Municipal aid is being cut by $134 million to just over $1.6 billion, and there's $3.3 billion for debt service. Full public workers' pension payment of $7.2 billion, and this is the fourth year in a row of fully funding it, is being made. There's $6 billion in health benefit payments to active and retired public employees. There's $2 billion for the anchor property tax relief program. It's the second year for that program. And there is $200 million for pre-funding of the Stay New Jersey property tax relief program, which will not be up and running until at least 2026. So let me welcome today's panelists. I'm joined by Dale Florio of Princeton Public Affairs Group. He's one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey, and his firm has worked on behalf of the NJCPA for 25 some odd years. Welcome, Dale. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Jeff.
We are also happy to have Chris Emmerholz, which I believe some of you have met him before. It's on our podcast. He is the Chief Government Affairs Officer of the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. He covers taxation, budget, and economic development issues. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Jeff. Happy to be here.
So we'll get into some of the specifics of the proposal later in the broadcast, especially corporate transit fee. But let's start with the overall impression of the proposed budget. Personally, I am not too happy with this budget, but I'm really not very surprised. And we surveyed NJCPA members about the proposed budget, and 77% said that it would make the economy worse over the long term. 11% said the economy will stay the same, and only 12% felt it would improve the economy. So, Dale, what do you think? Is this a good budget, a bad budget, somewhere in between?
On the one hand, Jeff, the administration has signaled that revenues are declining, right? That the the years ahead don't look very good, but yet they spend another $1.5 billion budget. So they're sending cross messages. Right. So I think for the first time in 4 or 5 years, or certainly since part of the pandemic and post the pandemic, this is going to be a very difficult budget. The governor is still looking to add new programs at a time when revenues are declining. So they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about how they're doing that.
Right.
But it's going to set up a confrontation. I mean, all you had to do was listen to yesterday's public hearing on the budget, and all of the social services groups, the hospitals, the community colleges coming in and saying, we need more, don't cut this, we need more. And I just don't know where it's going to come from.
Right, right. Chris, what do you think?
I think this is a bad budget for the business community, Jeff. And I love to see research from your members, the CPAs throughout the state. And obviously when they're concerned, I think they understand budgeting, they understand numbers, they understand what these mean in real terms for the businesses that are their clients. And those CPAs are right. They have reason to be concerned. I think a lot has changed in a year, where last year, I even might have said it to you and the CPAs, that was the most pro-business. The sixth Murphy budget last year was the most pro-business budget that Governor Murphy's proposed. Now the seventh one, we are opposed. This is a bad budget. And we look at it through the lens of this corporate business tax increase. It's a massive 20% increase in corporate business taxes, $1 billion. The governor is asking corporations to pay more of. Those are our job creators. Those are the folks that build new facilities. Those are the folks that innovate. We want to be an innovation state. Those are the folks that create those stronger and fairer jobs the governor wants. This budget's not going to help that.
Right, right. And it's a permanent.
And that's, it's a lot about this business tax increase is worse than the one that sunset back on, and just sunset a few weeks ago. It's not that long ago, December 31st. And this is what's tough is the governor was fantastic during the lame duck session saying, we got to let it go, and spoke to a BIA audience saying the right thing to do is to let it sunset. He was on public radio doing Ask the Governor show saying, we got to let it go. It's the right thing to do. And 2 weeks after that public radio address, we see $1 billion tax increase in his budget, bringing it back. And I think that just on top of a tax increase being bad policy, because this takes us from the 4th worst corporate tax environment in the nation to the worst tax rate in the entire country. On top of that, businesses, and this is something we hear from our accountants, they need predictability and stability and reliability. And to have kind of this roller coaster tax policy, businesses are not going to come here when they don't know if their tax is going to go up or down in a given year, and they can't trust what they hear from government. Right,
right. And just so it's clear, the way it's proposed right now is this corporate transportation fund, or whatever it's called, 2.5% hike is going to be retroactive to January 1st. So there really is no expiration of the old one. So let's jump right into what business leaders and political excuse me, and let's jump right into what business leaders and political insiders consider the most controversial aspect of this proposal. And that's the permanent 2.5% hike in taxes for corporations with more than 10 million in net earnings. So this is what we were just discussing. So let's watch a clip from Governor Murphy's budget address about this.
The fact is that right now, millions of families across New Jersey, indeed, frankly, across America, are making tough decisions about where to cut costs and how to save more money at the end of the month. Bless you again. And frankly, those kitchen table conversations are no different than the conversations that we're having right here in Trenton. At a moment of economic uncertainty and unease, how do we, as a state, move forward? Well, here's the good news. We are prepared to meet this moment. New Jersey is prepared to face our challenges confidently, capably, and ambitiously. And we are prepared because over the past 6+ years together, all of us, we have restored fiscal responsibility while remaining true to our values. We have saved money where we can, so we can invest more where it counts, strengthening the economic and societal foundation of New Jersey. Our proposed budget will once again lower costs for middle and working class families, as well as seniors, by providing another round of historic tax relief. and that includes the single largest property tax relief program in our history, the Anchor program. Last year, it provided more than $2.2 billion in direct relief to millions of homeowners, renters, and especially seniors. I'm pleased to say that our budget will include a surplus of over $6 billion, which will prepare us for any rainy days that lie ahead. And I think this is what fiscal responsibility is all about.
The governor referred to this as a corporate transit fee, but the reality is that it's a permanent extension of the 2.5% surcharge that expired on December 31st. This proposal, which came on the heels of the governor promising for months that he would let the surcharge expire, put the business community, as far as I could tell, in a state of shock. Before I ask you both about how you feel about this new tax, let me share what our members said in a recent survey. 78% opposed the fee, citing that the increase will prompt businesses to leave New Jersey. They said that New Jersey needs to focus on shrinking government, not imposing new taxes. So, Chris, I know this whole CBT surcharge is dear to your heart. You've been working on it, harping on it, trying to get rid of it for years, ever since it first came in. So you know all about it. Tell us the nuts and bolts of what this tax is. Just give us some of the details.
So our understanding is that the tax that was temporary, that just expired, was on companies that had a net income over $1 million. There was 3,100 of them in the state. Now the governor's office and Treasury Department tells us there's 600 companies that have a net income over 10 million, and this 2.5% surtax is going to go back on those 600, and that's expected to raise $1 billion in the proposed budget, and in the ballpark of 800 million going forward in the future. It's expected to be permanent. And the frustrating thing, and I'm sure you've heard from some of your members, I've heard from my members, like, oh, can we see language? Can we see legislation? And unfortunately,
right.
We always know that it might be midnight, June 23rd, where we see actually bill language on this. But we're expecting it to be permanent. We have to get into the details on what that $10 million exactly means. But we have to make sure that we do all we can right now to try to stop this, because I think it is, as I said, it's an affront to the business community. $1 billion tax increase on the corporations. And I know a lot of times I hear from some of the supporters of this that, oh, they can afford it. These are the biggest companies in the world. It's not about affordability. It's about competitiveness. And we have our state just next door, just over the Delaware River, Pennsylvania. They are in the middle of a bipartisan multi-year phase down. They used to be, when we were #1 in the nation on corporate taxes, they were #2. They just did a bipartisan plan. Governor Wolf, it was he worked with the legislature. Governor Shapiro was doubling down on it to take it from 9.9 to 4.9, cut it in half, their taxes. And that matters. That matters for our competitiveness. That matters for companies making decisions about where to relocate or expand. We want them to think about bringing those jobs and bringing that capital investment to New Jersey. This is something that hurts them.
Right. And as you pointed out, I've heard you point out before, that it's not just 600 companies that get hurt. It's the thousands and thousands of smaller companies that depend on the larger companies for business. So, well, I won't get into a big tirade about that.
No, thank you for saying that. How many accountants throughout the state work for, in some fashion, work for a corporation? How many, it might be 600 companies. How many thousands of New Jersey jobs come from those corporations that are good jobs? How many subcontracts? How many downtowns depend upon people going to the dry cleaners and the gym and the deli from those corporations?
Yes.
And it's a lot more than just 600, and they can afford it. It impacts everyone.
Right. So let me ask you a follow-up question, Chris. What happened? Why this about face? Why this cheerleading up until, I don't know, a month or two ago, saying, no, we can't, this is the governor I'm talking about, saying, we need to stick to our word. It's good for business to get rid of this surcharge. And then seemingly out of nowhere, a reverse on that. What do you think's going on here? What happened?
Good question, and I'd love to get to the bottom of that. I certainly cannot speak for Governor Murphy and the Murphy administration. What I will say is there truly is a fiscal cliff in NJ Transit. The crazy thing is it's not till next year, not FY25, it's an FY26 issue, but they will have a hole in their budget. Now, they're going to have a hole in their budget. Have we adequately looked at them for reforms to make them more efficient? So maybe they don't need as much money. Maybe they should reform because maybe we'll never get back to the amount of people using trains and buses that we used to get. I love that idea, and I love that it's important for New Jersey to have people wanting to go into downtown New York, downtown Philadelphia, to use all the mass transit resources that we have. We have great infrastructure in the state. That's an asset of ours. It's important. We got to invest in that. BIA always believes you should invest in transportation, but can we figure out how to find that investment through the time-honored approaches of just time and discipline, as we did with ramping up our pension aid, ramping up our school aid, good things to do. We didn't necessarily say, oh, we need to increase taxes by $1 billion or else we can't afford to do this. Naturally, the budget grows over time with inflation, with natural revenue growth, with the growth of the economy. Can we figure out how to use that growth and be a little disciplined in our other spending to prioritize it for transportation or Speaker Coughlin's Stay in J plan or school aid reforms or higher ed, whatever it is? We don't need new taxes. We are one of the most taxed states in the country. Let's figure out a way to look at spending. It's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
Right, which I hear our members say all the time. So Dale, you're a very keen observer of the political scene.
There's no politics in any of this, John.
Not at all.
All right, just a policy discussion. Okay, so from a policy perspective.
I'm kidding.
Politically, were you personally surprised? And what are I know you said there's no politics in this, but what are the politics behind this? I mean, were you surprised?
Not really, because really the first person that talked about this transit tax was the Senate president, right? He was the one that said, hey, we've got a problem here, right? And we should think about it. There's also something else going on in New Jersey that, whether it's true or not, the optics of it suggests that maybe, with the governor's wife running for the U.S. Senate, there's the optics of her politics and his politics. And as everybody knows, the progressive advocates have been pushing very hard to keep the surcharge in place, right? I mean, they haven't gone away on that. It's been very consistent. That's an important constituency for Tammy Murphy and her run for the U.S. Senate. So again, the cynic kind of looks at all of these things and says, yeah, maybe, okay. And again, it's the optics of this conversation, because when you look at this year's budget, there's not $1 billion going into the transit budget this year. It's about $200 million. Right. So the money's being used to do other things. You can placate the progressives by keeping the tax on, and there you go. We'll see what happens in November.
Right. My 2 cents was always, has always been that, first of all, I was shocked that way back when, a year ago, whatever, that he was out front as the cheerleader for letting it expire. I couldn't figure that out, though I think it has something to do with the fact that the 2 legislative leaders came down on him saying, eventually they did say, no, we should let it stay. And maybe they drew a line in the sand and he felt he had to stick. But anyway, that was a nice, happy surprise.
Well, I think some of that was a little bit of a pullback, as he reaches the end of his administration. Does he have a shot at a Biden administration post? So he's looking to maybe balance out his portfolio a little bit. But he obviously made a left-hand turn this fall, and it's disappointing. It's very disappointing.
Right.
And I think part of it also is the governor and legislature, to their credit, have talked more about, we got to make New Jersey more affordable. Now, I can't see how a tax increase on anybody will ultimately make the state more affordable. But I think the governor, maybe holding steadfast, got that and understood that. And let's not increase taxes, because affordability is an issue. It's an issue for businesses, it's an issue for people, for seniors, for everybody throughout the state. So I think the governor was embracing that affordability agenda, because taxes do not make us affordable. Now,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we keep talking about affordability, and that's on everybody's mind in New Jersey. But I think we also need to talk about affordability and competitive, right? We need to be affordable, but we need to be competitive. And that they don't necessarily get linked together in the conversation. But I think from a business community standpoint, a small business person's perspective, Yeah, it's affordable, but how do we get to affordable? We've got to be competitive with our neighboring
Got to have
states.
business, jobs.
Yes, exactly.
So while we're talking about taxes, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about this? I think they're calling it the warehouse tax, and it's only for $10 million, so that's not such a big bad deal. But there are some things about it, including its mysteriousness, that are really rubbing the business community the wrong way. So can you tell us what we know about that tax so far and why it's particularly aggravating?
Because we know almost nothing.
Well,
there is a line item in the budget called warehouse fee, which is 10 million more in revenue. And so one, I think just that number of 10 million, I don't see the logic in proposing something that basically is a revenue rounding error, especially when you're talking about $1 billion tax increase, which is abhorrent. And now we're saying, oh, 10 million. That $1 billion tax increase could be a 1 billion and 10 million. No one will know the difference.
Right,
and so why do you aggravate the business community? And I've heard from everybody in the logistics industry, retail, manufacturer, this is a tax on them. In a way, this is a tax on everything, because everything, this table, this mug, the water that we're drinking, was in a truck at one point in time.
Right.
And so, and probably in a warehouse at one point in time. And New Jersey is blessed to be kind of right in the middle of the Northeast corridor between Philadelphia and New York City, one of the busiest logistics states in the nation, in the world. That's a good thing. That creates jobs, that creates investment, that attracts people to New Jersey. There's always reasons to be here. We can't change our location. That's a great thing. Why would we want to do something to hurt the growing logistics industry and hurt who depends on logistics? Manufacturers do.
Everybody.
We want to support manufacturers. Retail, we want to support the retail industry. And everybody that buys something, everybody that's going to come home today and see an Amazon package on their front porch, do we want to make that more expensive? Do we want to put burdens in front of that porch getting to that package getting to your porch on time? Do we want to put burdens on ShopRite being able to get the food into their store on time and in an affordable manner? No.
Right,
and so
right.
I think it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And if there's some, and because we haven't seen any details as to what it's for and exactly how it'll be done, because it could be terribly complicated.
Right.
I'm hoping that the legislature does not buy into this proposal. And because it's $10 million, I think that could easily be thrown out and not happen. So I am a little more optimistic that this is probably not going to be something in the final budget.
Yeah.
And every time we ask about this, we hear, oh, it's just a proposal.
Right.
And we're just trying to feel things out and see where people are on it.
Right.
I hope that pretty quickly they've learned that it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that'll happen. I mean, that it'll be taken off the table eventually. So we have some audience questions. First one is, can the legislature guarantee that the corporate transit fee revenue actually funds New Jersey Transit, which is, I'm not an expert on this, but I would say, well, yes, but no. But let's go to Chris. You're an expert.
Well, I would say that's the $1 million question. Maybe it's more appropriate to say the $1 billion question. I think unless something is constitutionally dedicated, the dedication doesn't mean much. And so far, we have not seen a proposal from the governor or legislature to constitutionally dedicate it. And my worry, and Dale astutely said this, is that there's so many other spending needs out there. I think there's people in the legislature that just see a new bucket of $1 billion that can go to solve a bunch of holes.
Right.
So we call it NJ Transit. Maybe you can politically sell it as that, but it could help with a host of the spending needs that are out there. So I do worry about that, because if you know what, this is corporate money, and if the corporate community is going to step forward and do this, I'd much rather see it go to actually something like transportation investments than just go to balance the budget. My worry is that you can't trust that it's going to be dedicated. I hope it doesn't happen at all, but if it's going to happen, let's dedicate it to actually something that will create jobs, grow the economy, build new things. I don't want it just plugging the hole in NJ Transit's budget that is actually maintaining what they do. I want, you know what, let's bring NJ Transit and mass transit to South Jersey, Northwest Jersey, where there's a lack of those transportation resources. Let's figure out how you build new things to attract people to New Jersey and make our existing transportation infrastructure more attractive. It can't be just maintenance, but even with that, I think the dedication is definitely a big uncertainty until we see a constitutional resolution to do that.
Right. Would you agree?
I would, and just for your viewers' benefit, so what that means is that the legislature would have to pass a concurrent resolution to place the question on the ballot for the voters to say, yes, we want to dedicate this amount, this corporate surcharge money for the purposes of of New Jersey Transit. So it's an involved process. Most governors don't like dedications,
Can't play with it.
Because, it's easy to say this money's going to go for that. And then when you get to budget time, they move the money around. So we'd have to go through that process, have the voters approve it, to then create that lockbox, that dedication of those funds for that purpose.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And one more point on dedication, because this is a little more in the weeds, but I think talking to accountants, I think they will get this, is that the temporary surtax, and I alluded to this before, is less harmful in some ways, because if you're a publicly traded company, you've got to worry about how Wall Street looks at things. And the temporary tax is a cash hit. You owe X amount more to the state because of this tax increase. Companies were dealing with that for years while the temporary surtax was there. If you make it permanent, what now happens, you have the same cash hit where you're sending more money to the state, but now your balance sheet is impacted, and that's going to impact your stock.
Right.
And so, to some companies and some boards of directors out there, some CEOs, that's a bigger deal than actually just that little extra cash you're sending to the state. At many millions of dollars you're sending to the state, but now you might have a bigger impact on your stock is going down and the valuation of your company. And so I think it is important to think about that. This is now a double hit on a lot of those corporations that didn't pay this tax that they weren't dealing with before.
Right. So to the person who asked that question, the member that asked that question, the answer is theoretically, correct me if I'm wrong, yes, it'll say in the budget language when it passes, and I think it will, that all this money is going to go to New Jersey Transit. The reality is they can change that anytime they want, and next year's budget don't count on it. So that's about right. So yes and no. Don't believe what you hear, but you heard the truth here. So next question from a member, and I think there's a lot of confusion out there as to whether or not the gas tax and what does that have to do with the budget and so on. So we have a question where somebody's asking, will the increase in the gas tax support New Jersey Transit, which also ties into this corporate tax? That's your thing,
yeah,
right?
So we have this constituted, this what they call the Transportation Trust Fund, right? So transit does get a big chunk of that money, right? And there are a lot of people that don't think that the gas tax should be used for New Jersey Transit. It should just go into building roads and bridges and whatever. But transit does get a big chunk of it. In fact, they got close to $750 billion, from the last time. So there's a big chunk of money that does go to transit. Listen, I think both governors of both parties have underfunded transit for some time, right? They have, and they've gotten away with it. One, because ridership was strong, but pandemic, post-pandemic, that's all changed.
Yeah.
States, not only New Jersey, are going to have to relook at how they fund transit just generally, because transit's never going to get back.
Nope.
Public transportation is not going to ever get back to where it was before. So we need to rethink, how we're doing things. But in the current Transportation Trust Fund, because you're going to watch your gas tax go up, okay? But I think a lot of people would say, hey, as long as the money's going to go to build bridges and fix roads in New Jersey, and God knows we have a lot of those that need work, right? It might not be a bad thing, and maybe I'll pay a little extra for it.
Right.
It was a bipartisan vote.
Yep, we supported
Democrats
it.
and a bunch of Republicans supported it. So that money's locked in there, and that's what it's for.
Right. Although the whole thing needs to be reauthorized, so they could change those mechanics around it, but they won't.
Well, it was a 10-year plan,
okay.
right? So now it needed to be reauthorized, right? Because it allows then the agencies, the Turnpike Authority, the DOT, Transit, to then issue bonds.
I gotcha.
Right, so they can incur debt to begin those projects right away. That debt then is paid for by the money generated by the Transportation Trust Fund, a la the gas tax.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's look at fiscal soundness. For the past few years, while the state was awash in billions of COVID aid and billions of unanticipated tax revenues, the business community has generally had positive things to say regarding the state's budget, fiscal soundness. And I remember for the last 2 or 3 years, Dale, on the show, we have said that we have never seen anything like this with the state trying to figure out what to do with billions of dollars, and we'll probably never see it again. And I think we're there. So So there were some of the things that the business community and other groups applauded over the last few years in the budgets was actions such as making full payments into the public workers pension fund, steering billions of dollars into a special debt defeasance fund, and everybody was happy about that. In his budget address, the governor talked about fiscal responsibility and dealing with economic uncertainty. Let's watch a clip.
As our friends in the press are fond of reminding me, I have said many times that I would fix NJ Transit even if it killed me. Bear with me. I appear to still have a pulse, but better yet, I have a new proposal to support NJ Transit for years to come. Because pulling NJ Transit out of a crisis, that was just doing our job. Our promise was to fix NJ Transit so it can become the world-class transportation system we need it to be. And with our budget, we're going to build on our progress in fixing NJ Transit in a way which is consistent with our vision for a stronger and fairer New Jersey. Today, we are proposing a corporate transit fee. It will provide a dedicated funding stream for NJ Transit at no additional cost to our working families. With this fee, we're going to ask the biggest corporations with net incomes greater than $10 million to support NJ Transit's future. And we will raise this revenue without placing any new burdens on small and medium-sized businesses. In fact, nearly 2,500 companies will see their taxes decrease from last year.
So what about this budget, Chris? How does it rate in the area of fiscal responsibility?
Well, I think Governor Murphy and the legislature deserve credit for, in the past couple of years, getting to that 100% pension payment. This year, for the first time, getting to that 100% school aid payment. That defeasance fund, the surplus building up. But I almost think now you need to be bold and use that surplus. Like, surplus is there to stabilize your taxes and stabilize your spending in that rainy day. So again, we avoid that roller coaster policy. I would argue if you have $1 billion tax increase that some people think might be necessary, maybe we're in that rainy day and maybe you dip into that surplus a little more than otherwise. Now, yes, it's going down from the 8.7 to the 6.1 that you said at the top of the discussion, but I would argue maybe you dip into that a little more and then you look at spending efficiencies to avoid tax increases. But the fact that you still have a $6.1 billion surplus is good, but let's avoid some of the shocks and traumas that come with big tax increases or big spending cuts to things that we all think are important. And let's look at some of the spending in here that might not be that formulaic operational things that we think are good investments and things that maybe come as that one-time asks that were added in recent budgets. So I think there's more that can be done to make this budget responsible. And I think the biggest one in terms of the irresponsibility is, and again, something you mentioned at the top of the discussion, is the structural imbalance, that we are spending more money than we're bringing in. When you do that, you do have to eat into your surplus. And over time, as we saw recently with both the Sweeney Center at Rowan and Garden State Initiative put out recent reports about we're basically getting to a place where if spending keeps going up, surplus keeps going down to cover that spending, and that structural imbalance will catch up with us. And no one knows exactly when it is. We don't know how the economy and revenue is going to continue to perform. Hopefully they get better and we grow organically, but that's a worry.
Right. Yeah, it worries me too. I sit on that work group, so maybe that's why I'm so pessimistic. But they are nonpartisan. I mean, they have Democrats, Republicans, so it's not a left-leaning think tank. So along the lines of what you were just saying, where do you think we'll be in a few years? Do you think the surplus will be gone? Do you think Anchor will be gone, which is a $2 billion program, and slowly fade away?
It's going to be a balance between, there are some people that want to increase taxes to pay for everything. And one of the things I like to say about New Jersey is our tax environment is unrelenting. And what I mean by that is it's the highest corporate tax rate in the nation if this budget proposal goes through. It's the highest property taxes in the entire nation. It's among the highest personal income tax rates in the whole nation. And our sales tax is high. It's not the highest in the nation, but it's in the top tier. There's no other state in the entire country that has those four major taxes in the top tier of the 50 states. So other states, you kind of get a break. And I think it's wrong to think that we can continue going back to that well to increase another tax or give it more to local governments and increase their burden, which will only increase property taxes. We have to start thinking about spending cuts. And so I hope we can get back to the place, whether it was Senate President Sweeney and Chairman Sarlo and former Senator Orojo's work on the Path to Progress report, which I know, again, CPA Society's participated in, and it's always great to have you guys at the table on any fiscal discussion. But looking at reforms and real structural reforms are needed. And if we don't do that, you're going to either look at massive cuts or you're going to look at the need for tax increases. I would be of the opinion, in the business community, I think, is find efficiencies, find things to cut, find reforms, instead of actually getting back to the place where we don't do our full pension payment or we cut school aid. And worst of all is getting back to the place where we routinely increase taxes to cover a budget hole.
Right. And I like to remind people all the time that just because we're paying the full funding now for the pension for public workers doesn't mean the problem's going away. We still have bazillions of dollars in, on, liabilities that are still out there in the future. So Dale, what do you think on this issue? Are we going back to where we were, like no surplus in a few years, property tax rebates or anchor, whatever you want to call it, being cut in half due to, fiscal emergencies, or are the good old days coming back?
Well, these things go in cycles, Jeff, right? And we're going to complete this cycle probably at the election of the next governor in 2025. So if you look at this year and then next year, probably the cliff that Chris talked about will happen for the new governor, right? Be it Democrat or Republican. And there are going to be a lot of tough choices. Even in this budget, the governor has maintained over 100 individual line items for groups and organizations for spending, right? That's unheard of if you go back to the Christie, Corzine, and previous governors' administrations. Typically, they fund all the basic services. There may be a tax increase or a tax decrease in there, but you won't find things like money for this recreation department or money for this community program, right? Those things are typically negotiated and brought to the table by legislators who are looking for money to bring things back home, much like your members of Congress would. But so we still have a lot of what we would call Christmas tree items, pork, you can call it whatever you want. They're still in this budget. And the governor he cut in half a number of appropriations for a lot of these, what I would call social and health services groups. And they're screaming now. It's going to be very, very tough because it's not sustainable. The money's just not going to be there.
So you're saying that in the proposed budget, already up front is included line items for this Christmas tree type
things that have been maintained from the previous year,
okay,
that are still there. He did cut out a bunch of things,
right?
But this budget is still $1.5 billion more than it was last year.
Right.
It is $18 billion more since Chris Christie was in
grown 60%.
Was here. Yeah. It's unheard of.
Yeah.
Just unheard of. And the things that we haven't talked about the transit tax increase. We haven't talked about the electric vehicle tax increase. We haven't talked about the increase in the premium tax on health insurance. There are a lot of all these little taxes that are in there, and whatever you want to call it, the warehouse or the truck tax, because we don't know how it's going to be applied yet. These are all kind of new things that are riding below the corporate tax. If the business community wants to fight against the corporate tax, they need to start talking about these other taxes as well, because it's an effort by this administration to cover up spending that's quite frankly not necessary.
Right. So one last thing on the Christmas tree, just so I understand this, by putting it all up front, the legislature and the administration can claim later that we didn't do any last minute Christmas tree stuff like we did last year. That's the point, right?
Well, I mean, last year was historic in terms of the number of Christmas tree items that were listed in the budget. So essentially what they did is that they cut back on some of those, others they cut in half. But it's nobody is saying that they've avoided that kind of pushback. What it's going to force legislators who want to maintain some of that spending, they're going to have to bring that as part of the budget discussion come May and June.
Got it.
And by the way, don't get me wrong. I mean, other than maybe the money for the French Museum in Jersey City,
I love French art.
a lot of these social services programs are actually pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean, they stand on their own. They're legitimate.
Yep.
It's just, what can you afford and when?
Right. And how do you decide what good programs are going to be funded? And not just, well, some powerful guy wants it. So, Right. So we have another audience question. The second largest budget item is the $7.2 billion full payment to the pension fund. What should be done with the pension funding, and how can we continue solving for this dilemma? And I think they're getting to the point that I was saying, that it's a huge expense now, and but how are we going to continue to do full funding and just addressing the whole pension problem in general? So, Chris, I know this is another one of your babies.
I mean, it's the questioner from the audience is, I'm sorry, it's 1/8 of the budget. And so anything we can do to kind of bring down that cost. So it's the right thing to do by this administration, this legislature, to continue full funding of what the actuaries say should go into the pension fund. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody say, no, we shouldn't fund the full thing. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't reform it going forward. There have been talk out there, and again, the work that I referenced earlier, Path to Progress, of reforming this, not for the folks that are depending on their pension, not for the current pensioners, retirees, not for the folks that have been working for state government doing great public service for 10, 20 years, but folks entering the system. Do they need the same guaranteed pension? Can we look at maybe a more hybrid 401k-like plan that private sector, and actually a lot of public sector, has moved to in recent years, that's less expensive? And also, in addition to being less expensive for state government taxpayers, it also might be more beneficial for employees because it's more mobile. And in the world that we live in today, where the workforce has changed, it's not a lot of listeners might not work for the same accounting firm their entire career, might not work for the same retailer, manufacturer, or corporation, and people bounce around more than they used to. And so isn't it more beneficial to have that 401k-like plan that can hop? And so maybe they're in state government, maybe they go to local government, maybe they go to private sector, and if they can take a plan with them, and so is the pension. If you're not in state government for 10 years, you basically, you were putting in and get nothing. And so is there something we can do to make it more pro-employee, new employee, and pro-taxpayer with reforms? I think there's good work out there, and I hope someone takes it up. Right now, we haven't seen much interest in this administration, and hopefully that can come back.
Yep. So Dale, is that something, considering the governor's incredibly strong public worker union support, is that something that could happen in the next 2 years? I mean,
listen, probably not. But I mean, I would echo what Chris said. I mean, the governor gets credit, for fully funding the pension. The money was there, right? It is an obligation of the state, and we needed to do that. But we also have a very generous pension program. And quite frankly, what's more expensive than the pension program is the health benefits, right? Yeah. So, you need to look at that. I mean, it is certainly a function of government to do this, right? So we need to look at basics. That's a basic, a new education funding formula. Kudos to fully funding it this year, but we need a new funding formula, right? I mean, that funding formula, school districts change, populations shift, demographics change, right? So that needs to be looked at. But from a pension perspective, it's going to fall to a new governor to do that, despite the public employee concerns. I mean, should we be looking at 401ks for, going forward, as opposed to kind of what we have as an old-time pension plan? I don't know. But the financial situation we're going to find ourselves in may dictate it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So here's another question from one of our viewers. Do you think that Murphy will retaliate against New York's congestion pricing program? So, Dale, I'm going to ask you that, since half of that at least is a political question, I think, right?
At least.
So what do you think?
Well, listen, I think this has been a bipartisan issue led by Governor Murphy. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, it's what New York has proposed. They're trying to fix their transit system, and part of that fix is on our backs. Not fair. And he's picked up on it right away, and I think he's done everything one can do. Both he and Congressman Josh Gottheimer have been very out front on this, and it's not fair. I mean, to our people. So I'm not sure they're in the courts now, right?
Oh, still in the courts.
Yep,
Okay.
still in the courts, still going. I'm not sure what else we can do. My guess is that if we're unsuccessful in the courts, the governor and his team are going to have to figure out other ways to poke at New York for
retaliation.
For retaliation, but it's again, we're going to have a transit increase. We're going to pay more, but yet, and now we're going to pay more for this as well. Maybe there should be some sort of rev share back to our transit system, for what the city is going to get in.
Regionalize your thinking.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's already expensive enough to get into New York.
It is.
All right, so let's get on to the underlying structure of how the budgets are made. And let's look at some of the budget process reforms that have been talked about over the years. And it seems that the whole process, budget making process, which has never been a pretty thing, the old sausage, it seems like it's getting worse and worse. And now last year was really a nightmare. There was budget language that was not released until literally the last minute. And as we mentioned earlier, there was over $1 billion in Christmas tree items that were added without a proper accounting of what they were for until months after the adoption of the budget. Over the years, there have been many budget process reforms that have been proposed and introduced as legislation. These include consensus revenue reporting, stress test requirements, and multi-year forecasting. And some of these were in that legislation we worked on with the annual comprehensive financial report legislation, which was passed into law. And when that gets closer to being released in May, June, we'll probably have you back on to talk about it.
Look forward to that.
But none of these reforms that I've just mentioned have gone anywhere, even though many other states have implemented some of these reforms. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about the three reforms that I mentioned, stress testing, consensus revenue, and multi-year budgeting. Like, what does that mean?
So I guess starting off on the good news, I do think the idea that became bill and became law that came out of the CPA Society, came out of one of your members, Walter Brash, his brainchild, and that became law. And that is going to require a better fiscal reporting on what that annual report looks like that the legislature will be aware of. And we made sure it was in this legislation that includes how New Jersey stacks up against other states in terms of our spending, in terms of our debt, other liabilities. So I think anything we can do to make this process more transparent is a good thing for taxpayers. I think that transparency leads to more moderation and leads to less of us being an outlier in spending, as we've talked about earlier today, or outliers in taxation, as we've talked about. I think, so thank you to the CPA Society for working with BIA and the business community to get that done. I think that's a good thing. I think the consensus forecasting, the multi-year revenue stress testing, we've seen some movement, and we've seen it pass a committee, pass a house, not the other house, or never get up for a vote, or not get signed, like things like that. So we've seen some movement. I think all of those will make our system more transparent, because I think we need to do a better job, like businesses do, like sometimes accountants are doing for their businesses, thinking about what revenues will look like down the road, thinking of what spending will look like down the road, thinking about what long-term maintenance, long-term new products, long-term what the customers and clients will be like down the road. All of that long-term thinking is a good and healthy thing for the state. There are other states that do this, whether it's NJ Spotlight deserves a lot of credit. John Reitmeyer's done some great reporting on this and how we need to get better at that. I think Pew Center, Volcker Institute have put out there some of the best practice that we should follow. So I think we know what to do. And I think that the work of the Sweeney Center, getting back to them, it touched upon some of these things that we should be doing, and trying to put that multi-year revenue and spending plan out there. But again, anything we can do to make our system more transparent moderates us and is good for the taxpayer.
So Dale, the reasons that none of these have ever actually been adopted, or most of them, political? What are there political reasons, or are they just got better things to do in their mind?
Jeff, I wish I could be more optimistic about this. No, seriously, because it is a serious matter. I mean, I could have given you that cynical response. It'll never happen. I don't know if this next crisis, because the amount of money that we had, which in all my years I've never seen a state government have as much money as we've had. So I don't know if the rise, maybe the fall will be deeper than will be commensurate, right? Because we've spent so much, we've uplifted so many different types of programs that are now going to be stressed and may have to get cut, right? So our fall may be deeper, that might precipitate the need for these kind of emergency matters. I would think as a governor or a legislature, I would want these tools, right, to help explain to the public why we can't do things, why we can do things. That's how I would look at it.
Right.
So if we start heading this way, some of these tools might have a chance. At least have a 2-year budgeting process.
Right.
Take a look at that. But pulling back to reality here for a second, the fact is that legislatures and governors want the maximum flexibility to make changes at any one particular time. Now, none of these tools say you wouldn't be able to do that. It's just that you might be going into the process with a lot more information, and be able to see the future in a way that makes more sense.
Right.
But as I said, I think the next disaster might force the need for some of these tools.
Right.
I think something else with the timing, I think Dale is right on with that, is that sometimes that disaster crisis leads to opportunities. But I also would say, and not that we're taking positions on any of this, but you've seen the discussion about the Oprah reforms that were going on in the legislature. Not business fiscal issues, but that did bring a lot of people out to focus on, we need more transparency, not less. You saw the recent discussion about the line and very, very political discussion. But again, that's a lot of people know we want more access, more transparency of what's going on and what the ballot should be looking like. So I think we've seen kind of more engagement from the public on certain things around transparency. So this is a lot more complicated in the weeds on these transparency issues, but could that be a sign of things to come? Maybe. And then I would also say, it's not all bad, our process. I think what happens at the last minute is a mess. And I think a lot of legislators in the process would agree. But I do think we're about to start the public hearing, or we're in the middle of public hearings. We're about to start the departmental hearing part of the process. And Chairman Sarlo of the Senate Budget Committee and Chairwoman Pinto Moreno of the Assembly Budget Committee do a very good job at giving people access, making sure they hear their concerns. You see actually members of the public have a chance to kind of get on the radar their issues, and maybe if that gets enough attention, it makes its way into being a big issue in June. And that public part of the process, and having every single department commissioner come in and defend their budget, that is an important part of the process. A lot of people kind of dismiss that and say, that doesn't matter, that's just theater. But I've seen over the years senators on minority senators, majority senators, Senate Assembly kind of have chances to kind of get their point across and get it onto the table in what's negotiated in June based upon this public part of the process that we're in the middle of and going to be going on for the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite an education if somebody has the patience to sit through.
It is a long day, yes.
So Dale, let's take a look at the political outlook. I have a few questions for you. So we know that, and we've just said this several times, we know the business community is furious about this budget. What about the other political players, public worker unions, school advocates, progressives? I assume some of them are very happy with what has happened, correct?
Well, the unions are very happy. Obviously, they got the Transportation Trust Fund signed, right? But you don't see them out there working against supporting the corporate business tax. It's really just the advocates, what I would call the progressive social activists that want to see this happen. So, Chris and I were talking before we came on the program, why do legislators respond to them in a way that when they have employers that are employing hundreds and hundreds of people that could be affected. We have a large real estate client that is worried about this tax because of the companies that rent from them And do they go away? Do they go to Pennsylvania when Josh Shapiro gets his corporate reductions? You know, so it has a big ripple effect. But I would say from the politics standpoint of it, the corporate tax has really just been driven by what I would call more very left of center groups, not the unions.
Teachers and
the public employees are happy because of the fully funded pensions.
Okay.
Right. So
that's interesting.
You know,
I hadn't thought of that. So they're happy whenever there's a tax increase. Just kidding. Well, not really. Okay. So, Dale, again, do you think this corporate transit fee, once all is said and done, will be adopted or something very close to how it looks now?
We're sitting here in March, and it's a long way. I'm going to give it a 50-50 that it could go either way.
Oh, really?
I'm not convinced that it ultimately happens the way it happens now. And I wouldn't be surprised if it went away.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that there are some, I think that the key thing here is that the Assembly Speaker wants his Stay New Jersey program.
Right.
Right? That's key. I think some of these other things, you know, I could see the leadership not necessarily supporting the corporate extension.
You mean just dropping it down enough to pay for Stay New Jersey?
I could see it. As I said, it's March, and as we know, a lot of big decisions get made mid to late June. I think there's still a 50-50 chance if the business community and its friends step up, right? It's got to be, and it has to be more than just the associations led by Chris and others, right? We need individual companies.
Yes.
Small business people. I mean, the business community has never had the same grassroots ability.
It's always been a problem.
That other labor unions and public unions have had. But this will be a test.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear 50-50. I was thinking 10%.
Thanks, Jeff.
I have faith in Chris.
We can hope.
So, Dale, again, what about, you touched on this, the other big ticket items like Anchor New Jersey, Save New Jersey? You see them going through pretty much as they are in the budget now?
Right now, I mean, the State of New Jersey is big for the Speaker. I mean, quite frankly, when he kind of introduced that mid to late May of last year, that kind of threw last year's budget process into a little bit of a tizzy because it was a big thing, and they were, you know, they thought they were getting close to kind of a final budget, so that had to be discussed. He's carried it forward. That's huge for him. He is often mentioned as a potential gubernatorial candidate, so I suspect that would be important if he decided to take that next step. But I think it also then begs the question of, like, why wouldn't you figure out a way to combine all of these rebate programs, these property tax programs? We know we have an affordability and a competitive problem, right? But affordability, if that's what you want to do, you know, make it easier for people to understand which program is which. But why wouldn't you combine them?
Right.
But I'd say both of those programs will be there at the end of the day.
Yeah. We did a show a year or two ago with a property tax expert, one of our members, and it's so complicated how these mesh and who can use them. And anyway, so
I think the participation rate, I was trying to get that. The participation rate in these programs isn't as high as you would think. So people are leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
Again, because they don't know how to apply, who it applies to.
It's
especially anything about the seniors.
Yeah.
I've had people ask me, and you know I'm not a CPA, but I work for the CPA. So can I apply for this, that, or whatever? And I'm like, look, I know it looks simple, what they say in the newspapers. I haven't got a clue, though. Go see your CPA. So one other political question. Are there any other areas of contention that you see that might arise between the legislature and the governor on this budget? Anything that might sort of make things rocky?
When you talk about the legislature, you talk about the legislative leadership?
Yeah, as the budget's moving
as opposed
through.
to the Republicans versus
Yeah.
I think we've talked about them. You know, we know the Speaker's top priority.
Right.
And I think the corporate tax will be certainly an issue, especially since the Senate President talked about it as important. He may want to see actually money go to transit, as opposed to just, you know, collecting the money and then using it for other things. But, governors have 2 terms, right? 8 years. These legislators are going to be here
forever.
And so I think even Senator Sarlo said yesterday at the public hearing that this is going to be a different budget year. So they're going to be here. They've been here in the good times. I think they understand the bad times are coming. So I think you're going to see a bit more moderation, a little bit more conservatism in what they bring to the table with the governor.
Right.
I think the issues are out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see some cutback from the legislative leadership on this.
No, I didn't even think about that.
And that's why I think the corporate business tax is still in play.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So in the area of what we were just discussing about, how the business community needs to get involved and so on in fighting for its interests and lower taxes and so on. Can you tell us, Chris, you're with one of the largest business associations in New Jersey. What has been the business community's response to this budget, and in particular the corporate transit fee? And what are they going to do? What are we all going to do? Tell us about the NJCPA's Better for Business campaign.
Yeah, so I think what you've seen is a more united business community that has been more aggressively asserting itself, opposing what the governor's trying to get done in this budget. The example is just yesterday, it's kind of the rite of passage every single spring is business community, our lobbyists, our government affairs folks are speaking on behalf of our members to the budget committees. But didn't happen this year. What happened is my boss, Michelle Sekurka, the president and CEO of NJCPA, president and CEO of the State Chamber of Commerce, president and CEO of the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce, they all spoke, not their lobbyists, but they spoke.
Right.
Because we wanted to make sure, legislature, this is different. You guys have crossed the line. You guys are basically saying we're doing something anti-business here. And so we're trying to make sure that our reaction, our responses to this budget are different, because we do think the policy proposed here is different. And it's more of a punitive anti-business message than we've seen in recent years. Part of that is we have launched right now, it's a social media campaign. Hopefully some of the CPAs out there have seen it, but hashtag Do Better for Business. It's been all over LinkedIn and Facebook and some of the other places where you follow social stuff. But hopefully you will be seeing more on that soon, and maybe some things that go beyond social media. And look forward to working with the CPA Society, as we always do, because you guys are fantastic partners. And as Dale said, it's important to get the broader business community, and we're all working together on this. And I think you're seeing that. I hope that continues. I expect it to. Hopefully we can have a chance and look out for this campaign, because hopefully you guys can reach out. We will be engaging our voter voice system to reach out to your legislators to say you're upset about this. We were working with local chambers and our New Jersey Business Coalition that BIA stood up a couple of years ago during the pandemic to make sure that all the business organizations of the whole state were on the same page during COVID-19 and all the impacts on the business community. And we've continued that to just kind of keep people on the same page. So the Business Coalition will be taking action. So that'll be something coming soon. We're asking local chambers to maybe do chamber board resolutions opposed to this business tax increase. So we're trying to do more of a grassroots effort, a social media campaign, maybe some other stuff out there, emails, advertisements. But it's something that I haven't seen us as assertive as we've been these past month or so in a long time. I think it's a good thing. Yep. It's not a good thing that we're fighting this tax, because we'd rather not be. It was much nicer last year when it was more positive budget. But still, it's again, a crisis leads to opportunity, and to bring people together and to maybe get some positive going on that make us more efficient, and maybe a little more focus on growing the economy instead of hurting the economy would be a good thing.
Dale, do you have any other thoughts as to what business community can or should do? I mean, how do you fight a legislature and a governor that are pretty progressive?
Listen, I wouldn't categorize the legislature as necessarily progressive. I really wouldn't. I mean, I think if you look at the two leaders, they're actually pretty moderate individuals, right? But they're political, right? But I would think, if you had a conversation with either of them, I think they're, center left, but not like far left. They're not in the governor's camp.
Right.
So I do think local pressure matters, right? I mean, it does. So, I mean, if Chris and the chamber and others can get their members in these districts to say and talk about real examples of why this could impact me, I think it could make a difference. I really do. I don't think these guys want to do it.
Right.
The governor proposed it. They put this fantasy up there that it's going to transit. Transit has bigger problems. The money's not going to transit. So it can be won if you can really get into the grassroots of local businesses. I like the idea of getting local chambers doing their resolutions and getting their members motivated. I don't know why we don't, as business people, don't have the same passion levels as some of these social and health services.
Because they're working.
Because they're working, I guess. There you go. Right.
So I have some final audience questions. So lawmakers talk a lot about keeping retirees in the state, but what are they doing to make New Jersey more affordable for young people? Chris, I'll give you this with you.
I would say not as much as I would hope. And I know it's important. I would never take anything away from the importance of having multiple generations stay in the state and having grandparents and parents and grandchildren all kind of living in that same neighborhood and same town and same state. That's important. But the speaker deserves credit for thinking about senior affordability with this day in J. And we've answered those things over the years. But I think you're right. I don't think we're doing enough on young people. And one of the issues we've always noticed, out-migration for our seniors has been a problem in New Jersey for years. Also, out-migration of our college students' youth has been a problem because they go to college in New Jersey. Sometimes we're a small state, so it's not necessarily that we don't have great options for higher education here, but we're a small state. People might want to go away to, even if it's in the Northeast, go to New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland for college, but then they might realize, wait, it's cheaper to stay where I went. It's cheaper if they go in the Southeast or Midwest or out West, and maybe they stay there. And we lost that young person that we want to come back. We want to get them working in the state of New Jersey. We want to get them buying homes in the state of New Jersey. So I don't think we do enough. There is, and I believe it's being signed as we speak, but the legislature and governor just passed an affordable housing initiative today. Yeah. So that's focused on housing in New Jersey is expensive. If you own those homes, you're probably happy it's expensive and happy it keeps going up in cost. But if we want young people to be able to afford their home, and we hear this term now, and it's not as easily defined, but this working class housing, we need to do more to make New Jersey affordable to buy a home. We got to do more to make New Jersey affordable for those small businesses to continue operating. And we're seeing more and more that a lot of young people want to start businesses. Entrepreneurship is fantastic, and that's how you create a lot of jobs. But it's not easy to start a business in New Jersey. So let's have young people come back to New Jersey and not be faced with these crazy high taxes and overregulation, and so that they could say, wait, I could start a business in something I care about, selling something I care about, or whatever service they want to provide. Start your own accounting firm.
Right.
But we want to encourage that, but affordability does stand in the way of that. So I don't think we're doing enough. Affordable housing is one area, but we need to look at property taxes. We need to look at personal income taxes. And hopefully we can continue to get better at that.
Thanks. So next question is for Dale. With student loan debt growing every year, will more attention be paid to funding New Jersey's public colleges to help keep tuition manageable for students and families? And I think I just heard that actually, I know the public universities are complaining, right, that they're not getting enough. But so assuming that's correct, how would you answer that question?
So the thing I would add to just the front end of that is that I think this administration has done a pretty good job of workforce development programs, combined with our community colleges that are, and then also there's been an emphasis on kids that have skills that aren't necessarily college kids, but in the vocational end. I mean, I think that's a very underserved area in the state, and I think this administration is trying to put some focus on that because not everybody goes to college. But they're kids that we need HVAC, we need plumbers, we need those trades, and I think there's a need for that, and I think that's how you maybe keep kids in New Jersey if they can get those skills. Yes, the higher ed is not happy with this budget, and despite various programs that students can access like tuition aid grants and other things like that, we probably need to do a better job of of supporting our public institutions, right? And we have some very good private ones too, but certainly our public ones, the money hasn't been, I think, what they had hoped. I think on the flip side of that, though, is that the administration should be watching to see how publics are also spending their money, right? It's a national discussion about, what our colleges, what they're spending, their salaries, this and that. But I think that, again, this administration should be looking very closely at supporting our public colleges in a significant way. That's how you keep kids home, right? If it's affordable, I can stay home and I can go to school. Maybe I can get a part-time job. So it all has a beneficial impact all the way around.
Right. Yeah, and one thing on higher ed, county colleges are particularly upset that there was a $20 million cut in their operating aid. And I think county colleges are a more affordable option for a lot of kids out there, and also a lot of adults, a lot of training folks looking to just get a second career, and hopefully that could be something that gets addressed, because I think that's a big impact on workforce development.
A lot of kids my daughter did 2 years at community college, graduated from Rutgers, right? Yeah. Those partnerships now, we need to promote that in a big way.
Right, and I guess I should make a pitch for our pipeline, CPA pipeline advocacy initiatives. We have a task force working just on the advocacy part of that, which is, working with state government to find ways for. We
need more accountants. Yeah, that's a K-12 issue, college issue, higher ed issue.
Yes. So for those of you CPAs out there who are very upset about the pipeline problem, we're working on it. So we're approaching the final end of our broadcast. So let me ask each of you for your closing thoughts about the budget and anything else we may not have covered today. Chris?
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. First off, it's always been a pleasure to work with the CPA Society and you and the great staff here. You guys are a great partner in all the things the business community is trying to work on and make New Jersey more pro-business. And so thank you for that. And always enjoy talking to your members. I would say in closing, I would ask three groups of people, whether it's our policymakers, just the public in general, and the members of BIA, the business community at large, is we need to do better for business. And so that campaign, please get involved.
Yeah.
I don't think we think about the rash of small business closings that we've seen in recent years. I don't think we think about just how much more expensive we are vis-a-vis other states and how that competitiveness matters. I don't think we think about the rash. You know what? Maybe if we are expensive, the amount of overregulation that businesses have to deal with on the labor side, environment side, and just it's hard to run a business here, whether it's on the corporate Fortune 500 company or if it's on the mom and pop in downtown Main Street. And the tax increase proposed in this budget, and also a lot of the cuts in this budget that are actually to business programs, like it's just unconscionable. And I don't think this budget does anything to make us more competitive. And the best way to grow our revenue is through organic, natural revenue growth. And this budget is going to degenerate our revenues, go in the opposite direction on that. Yep. And so I'm worried about it, but we're going to be doing our best and working with the whole business community to try to make this budget a little more pro-business and whatever gets passed in June, and look forward to that process. Look forward to working with you, working with Dale and all your clients.
Thank you. So Dale, do you have any closing thoughts about the budget, perhaps some things we might have missed?
I think worst case scenario, Jeff, here is that the amount of this budget as proposed by the governor, that'll be the cap, right? I'm going to say that'll be the cap. I don't think the legislature may ask for ads, but I think it'll stay in the cap, meaning that things will then get moved around.
Okay.
Right. So I'm making that prediction.
It's a good one.
I hope I'm right. But what happens below that cap and how things get moved around, that's where I think you referenced sausage before. If people knew how sausage was made, okay, they wouldn't eat it. So we've got a long way to go, as I said earlier, but I think that'll be the cap. And because I do think the legislature is looking at next year and the year after it and the year after that. And the governor's race has already started, and they're looking at that as well. So I think they need to know that they got to start to pull back a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with you. I would bet on that they're not going to go over the cap, at least not by much. Well, Chris, Dale, as always, I've learned a lot from you, and I'm sure our members have as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to doing this again a year from now. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for watching. Have a great day.